Welcome to the Farm to Fork Soundbites mini-series. We're joining you live from the Rabobank Farm to Fork conference here in Sydney on the 23rd of March. And we're going to be sharing with you the key themes and insights from throughout the day. My name is Emma Higgins. I am the Senior Agriculture Analyst for New Zealand. I'm based in Nelson, New Zealand, so the top of the South Island. And today I'm joined in person by Picton, who is our Senior Strategist, Global Economics and Markets, and he is normally based here in Sydney as well. So welcome, Ben.
Thanks, Emma. Great to be with you today, and what a fantastic event. It's going really, really well, isn't it?
It is. It's nice to be, one, recording this in person, and two, hearing from some fabulous speakers actually live and in person as well. Ben, what I think we should be chatting about today is what I like to refer to as all the big stuff out there. There's a lot going on, isn't there?
Absolutely. And we just heard from Jan Lambrechts, who heads up the Global Economics and Markets team. And Jan is always box office, so it's a little bit hard to follow in his shadow, but we'll unpack some of the things that he talked about today.
Yeah, so he had a really interesting presentation. It really covered the 10 macro themes that he's watching. And I thought we could unpack some of them. And the first one, maybe if we kick off with, is around the deglobalization story, or as some people might be referring to it more locally, it's just around the geopolitical side of things out there.
Yeah, so this is definitely a very big topical item, and something that we at Rabo have been tracking since about 2015. So we were quite early onto this. So in terms of deglobalization and I guess breakdown of the globalist system that we've seen over the last few decades, we've sort of seen a few fault lines. People think about things like the Brexit vote, the election of Donald Trump on a fairly anti-free trade type agenda. So there's definitely been this developing theme, and we're seeing this more and more. And tensions between major powers is definitely a theme going forward.
Yeah, the great power struggle, I think, was what Jan really referred to there.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see this manifesting in things like the war in Ukraine. We see tensions over Taiwan in our region here. And it sort of feeds through into the economy through things like trade barriers. People here in Australia would be aware that China stopped importing our cotton, our wine, some of our coal, lobster tails, all those sorts of things. So these tensions between different countries that perhaps have different value systems, they can have real on-the-ground impacts for farmers.
Absolutely. You know, from a New Zealand perspective, luckily we haven't had to deal with those sorts of challenges just yet. Fingers crossed, touch wood. But certainly from a risk perspective, New Zealand is very exposed to China. We ship a lot of our export products there. It is something that we're watching very closely, and we're taking advice on from your team on the latest developments on that front. So certainly quite a big piece, I would say, to watch over the coming weeks and months.
Absolutely.
The second big item that really caught my attention was the one around climate change, or the Great Climate Challenge, I think, as it were. Tell us a little bit about what we mean by that.
Yeah, so climate change, very topical, something that everyone's been talking about really for a few decades now. And if we think about supply chains and what climate change might mean, you know, we talk about certain areas of the world seasonally more hot than what they were in the past. You know, we have changing patterns in terms of rainfall. And all of these things sort of mean that maybe what you used to grow in one area previously and the sort of yields that you might be able to expect, that might not be the case going forward. I was talking to one grower yesterday who's up in Queensland. They were telling me that they used to get very reliable eastern rains, and they just don't really see that anymore.
Yeah.
Things have changed. So it is an important thing going forward. It will have implications for how do we feed 11 billion people in the future. So yeah, extremely topical.
I think the other interesting element of that particular discussion point was around the need to invest more, right, in terms of the energy space. And what I was inferring from Jan's comments was that might potentially have an inflationary impact.
Yeah, that's correct. So as we invest more, there's demand for new capital goods, and you need to be able to meet that supply. So if everyone's thinking the same thing, everyone's borrowing money or going out and spending money trying to buy these capital goods, they need to be manufactured somewhere. They need to be shipped into various different countries, and if everyone's trying to do the same thing all at the same time, pushes pricing up.
Absolutely. And obviously inflation is a very hot topic at the moment. Just thinking about some of the news that we heard this morning as well from the US Fed.
Yeah, that's right. So the US Federal Reserve increased their official Fed funds rate by 0.25% overnight. Very interesting meeting, actually, because a lot of people in the market were expecting them to stay on hold, and that's because of the banking crisis that's been unfolding in the United States and Europe. They didn't do that. They very much continued to focus on the real economy. Inflation is still very high, and their view is that rates need to go up to get it under control.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so lots moving in that space as well. A lot of it has implications for the economy, another thing to keep abreast of. The third interesting factor that Jan spoke about was the demographic side of things, and he opened up with a line, "Oh, baby, baby." And he talked about the fact that while everyone was under lockdown in China, there was one thing that they were not doing, and that was making babies.
Yeah, that's right. So, yeah, this is a really interesting one. If we think about sort of developed economies, but it's not only developed economies, there is a bit of a maybe fertility crisis isn't quite the right phrase, but low fertility is certainly the case. And what that means effectively is that the only way you can sort of grow your population in places like Australia, New Zealand, even the United States is through immigration, because we're not having enough children to actually replace current population. These sorts of issues are actually particularly bad in countries like Japan and China. Japan has a rapidly aging population, and China, coming out of the one-child policy years ago, what we've found is that they've sort of hit a point where Chinese parents, even though they're allowed to have 3 children now, they still have a preference for only one.
That's right. We've seen the change in the one-child policy to the 2-children policy, and now there's perhaps a 3rd child that is allowed, and we're not really seeing supportive data come out from that.
That's right. So even though the government is now saying you can go out and have 3 children, go and do your bit for the country, Chinese parents are deciding that they only want one. And sort of one of the effects that we've observed here is that there's a focus on, and this is a bit of a strange term, but quality of child rather than quantity of child. So whereas in the past parents might have had 3 or 4 kids, now they're only having one, but they're putting more of their resources into things like education and paying for housing and things like that for that one child.
Does this have an implication for labour markets more broadly?
Yeah, absolutely it does. And for countries that have a rapidly ageing population, and we just named a few of them, Japan and China, particularly in this boat, what it means is that over time they'll have a shrinking population, and they'll have fewer workers who are producing, paying taxes, and paying for the ageing population. So if you've got a lot of old people and you've only got a few people who are working, then it puts a lot of strain on those younger workers.
Yeah, absolutely. So there were a lot of other topics that Jan delved into, and I think we've covered off the main 3 ones, which really goes back to geopolitics, the climate change crisis, and changing demographics. There's a lot to keep abreast of here. What's one piece of advice that you might be able to give some of our listeners around what do they do with this information?
Yeah, I think one major takeaway that we can really give our listeners is just to recognise that the world has changed and is changing. So I think we tend to think about the world in terms of a few distinct periods, and sort of like pre-global financial crisis is one of those periods, and then we have this 10-year stretch until COVID-19, and now we're in, I guess, what we would refer to as the post-COVID world. What I would suggest is that these big trends, big macro trends, what that means is that the world isn't going back to what it was before. And I think that most of these trends are pointing to a structurally higher inflation world, and that probably means a structurally higher interest rate world as well. So maybe people just need to be a little bit prepared for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the way that Jan also liked to summarize it, which really struck home with me, was that these are not a series of one-off events. These are all interconnected in, what seems to be quite a mega crisis. And what he also noted was that the opportunity here is for people listening to this to really be more resilient and be prepared for multiple futures, because there are so many ways that these things could go. We're talking about huge things here. So really just to be flexible, agile, and be prepared for a variety of different futures.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess the message is in some ways the same as it's always been. It's, manage your risks, think about your business, and and just be alive to some of the problems that are out there.
Yeah, cool. Thank you so much, Ben, for your insights. It's great to be doing this in person, as I said. And no doubt we'll be talking about these big macro themes over the coming weeks and months.
Absolutely. Thanks, Emma.